Hi everyone. Since we're having an online discussion this week, I wanted to take a little bit of time to watch ourselves in this process because watching ourselves in this process is a great way for us to examine what's happening and learn about how to skillfully engage in an online discussion. If we can learn to more skillfully engage in an online discussion, we certainly will be better equipped to help our students more skillfully engage if we're going to hold online discussions as part of our blended or online courses. So a good friend once told me that being a good friend, I asked this friend for advice about how to help my young child learn to make friends. And he distilled it down really beautifully. He said, being a good friend starts by being both interested and interesting. So for my child, being interesting was challenging. He needed to come up with some stories about what was happening in his life that he really wanted to talk about so that he could be interesting. It was much easier for him to be interested, to listen and ask questions of another person. I think for many of us in the teaching professions, it's easy to be interesting. We have a lot to say. We profess for a living, and it's harder to be interested and to really stay with someone else's story or someone else's question or passion or dream or idea. It's harder for us to just ask questions and listen. Another layer of complexity comes in the online environment because we forget when we're in a discussion thread that we're actually in a circle. We think we are just talking back and forth with the person who began the thread. But after that person started the thread, someone else maybe stepped in and shared a thought in response to the thread. And so if we're the third person coming in, we need to consider not only what the first person said, but also the next person as we're engaging in the discussion, so that we think of it more as sitting around a table in that discussion thread versus each person just sharing their one thought with the person who started the thread. How do we do that? Well, I think you, in the course, if you look at what's been happening, you have given some great models for how to do this. So I'm going to take a look and pull out some threads of what you've been doing to highlight what is going really well. So I've pulled together some threads of what's happening in the discussion, and you'll see me looking over at what I've pulled together. One of the lovely things about teaching online is that you can look back at what has been said. You can watch the dynamics of a discussion unfold and learn a lot about dialogue and meaning and motivation and things like that. You can take a glimpse into the inner life of your students, or in this case, our colleagues who are in the course with us. And I would say that when we look at what's happening so far, we're seeing Julie asked a question, how do we help the soul show up online? That's part of who we are at Edgewood. And for me, I'm seeing souls showing up in the blog stories, in the comments to the blog stories, and also in the discussion forum. You've been sharing your souls through storytelling, through sharing your hopes, your excitement, some of your dreams about things you want to put online. And also, the soul shows up through fear and through grief and through warnings. And so some of the hard questions that you're asking are also really showing the passion of your souls. I think in this group, there are stories, a lot of stories of tenacity, of taking really challenging situations and transforming them into creative possibility. So there's stories of people who've rescued farms and animals, organic gardening knowledge, holding on to that and passing that along to the future, of learning to share music as healing, as medicine. There are self-taught musicians and community leaders in the group who are grandparenting and also leading out in the wider community in very heart-centered ways. There's stories of creative blended classes that could target the interests and passions of today's students. There are stories of transforming one's own struggles to become a musician into compassionate support for students who are now facing those struggles. There's stories of steadfast searching for truth through research, dissertation research about culture, art, and identity. There are souls showing up through questions that are being asked. And some of the questions really illuminate the passion for education that each of you have. So some of the questions you've been asking so far are, what valuable roles can dissenters play in our courses if we learn to value what they're bringing to us? How can we motivate our students or tap into their intrinsic motivations that maybe are currently not visible to us? How can we create spaces online where students feel a natural sense of each other's social presence, where they can kind of show up casually as they really are and connect the content, connect to the content, make those connections to the content on their own terms? How might the online environment offer advantages when our goal is to help students take the time for deep reflection? Another question, beautiful question, how might I lose the beautiful spontaneity and that on-the-fly kind of guidance that I can now give my students in their labs? How might I lose that as I go online? Or what can I do to bring these key aspects of what happens in my labs into an online learning environment? How might blended learning empower students to take ownership of their work and collaboratively make decisions about their own learning? And a quote shared by Sergey, the internet is a graveyard for dead facts. But, unlike any fact, an idea that grips a person is alive. An idea has an aim. It wants something. It impels a person to act it out. Based on this quote, how can we find an idea that grips our students and compels them to act? Or, turning that around, how can they help us find an idea that compels us to act with them, co-learning with them, for ourselves, for them, and for our communities? There's a beautiful quote by Henry David Thoreau. He says, "Though I do not believe that a plant will spring up where no seed has been, I have great faith in a seed. Convince me that you have a seed there, and I'm prepared to expect wonders." Stories and those gripping ideas that Sergey talked about, and all of the kinds of teaching stories that are being shared. These are the best kinds of seeds in a thoughtful dialogue, whether that dialogue is on ground or online. When someone shares a gripping idea or story with you, what do? First, listen. If you're in a group and someone else has asked a question, listen to their question and then respond if you have some thoughts to share, or let someone else respond, and then pose your own questions so that you're remembering that you're in a circle. And then share your take on the next answer before posing other questions, so that we are, as Parker Palmer would say, we're listening each other into further and deeper speech. That kind of listening allows us to get down beneath the tips of those icebergs. Whereas if we just keep sharing little tidbits of stories and questions without starting to share our own perspectives and answers, we'll feel like we're skipping over the tips of icebergs. So I hope that this is helpful as we continue this discussion. The discussion will be continuing through Tuesday, so please make sure to try out things. This is all a creative experiment. And it's going beautifully. I'm really grateful for the generosity that you are showing each other in this group. So let's continue. Thanks.